"Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," the old, sour-faced lizard said, drawing the attention of the gathering. His voice cut through the murmurs as his narrow eyes scanned the crowd. "I am Zalrock Drathel, head of the Slaver Guild's Eastern Branch." The lizard spoke with an air of indifference, as if this briefing was beneath him. "I'm sure some of you are wondering why this briefing is necessary. After all, you're all supposed to be experts." Zalrock paused to pick at his scales, as if bored with the whole affair. "But I assure you it is. I recommend you listen until the end for your own sake." "Ah, there he goes," he sighed as one of the lizards in the back rose from his seat and stormed out, leaving the room in silence. His lost Zalrock snorted dismissively before continuing. "Now, the reason we are gathered here is simple. The situation in this region is unlike any other. You see, a new race has emerged from the Borkus continent, and the Senate has declared them Telti status equal to ours." The room erupted in gasps as Zalrock continued. "They're called humans, and they come from another world." The crowd whispered among themselves, their hisses filling the air. A new race. And their Telt Zalrock let the murmurs roll over him, unconcerned. "For some of you, this may not be news, but for those who have never set foot on this continent, it is crucial information." He spoke with an almost robotic tone, devoid of concern. "Humans resemble felines, though they lack fur, claws, and tails. They're also much slower and physically weaker." But Zalrock leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "What makes them truly important isn't their appearance, nor the fact that they come from another world. It's their culture." The humans are vehemently opposed to slavery. The room buzzed with outrage. "How can they be Telti if they hate slavery?" one of the lizards shouted. The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices growing louder. "Not only do humans oppose slavery," Zalrock continued, ignoring the outburst, "but some of them are so morally driven that they've attacked several slave markets in Borkus, freeing the slaves or forcing slavers to employ them as workers. They even consider the felines as allies, believing in equality across races." The crowd exploded at this, furious at the suggestion that such a weak, new race could hold such beliefs. "The Senate's decision is final," Zalrock reminded the audience. "We do not yet know how many humans are here, but they tend to settle along the major trade routes. For this reason, it is imperative that you understand the 4 types of human settlements." "How long do you think this journey will take?" Count Tarvin Garak grumbled, his voice sharp as he addressed his aide. "Approximately 2 months, my lord," one of the guards replied, his voice respectful but wary of the Count's temper. 2 months? Bah, at least we've enough supplies." Tarvin leaned back in his seat, his face twisted in irritation. "Let's hope these slaves survive. They're worth nothing to me dead." He cast a glance toward the wagons behind his carriage, each packed with slaves, both felines and Volps, chained and lifeless in their despair. "We could have made better time if that damn guild hadn't delayed us back there," Tarvin complained. "They kept us waiting for hours just to give us some ridiculous briefing. Can you believe it?" His voice dripped with contempt. "How long until we reach another settlement?" he asked, growing more impatient by the second. "In about 20 minutes, my lord, we'll reach a human settlement called the town of Salam," the aide informed. "A human town? Damn it. We should have taken the southern route back at the port. This route has the fewest human settlements along the way." "My lord," the aide responded cautiously. Tarvin gave him a dark look, seething. "The fewest, you say? These cursed humans are everywhere." He leaned out of his carriage and looked back at the endless line of wagons filled with slaves. Before the humans arrived, slavers could sell half a wagon's worth of slaves at each city. Now? Tarvin had passed 3 towns and sold barely a handful. His frustration festered like a wound. One of the guards called out, pointing to the horizon. A large stone wall loomed ahead, spanning the forest to the river. Finally, Tarvin muttered, as they approached the town. The humans manning the checkpoint stared at the caravan as it passed through, their expressions unreadable but unsettling. Tarvin sat in silence while his aide handled the paperwork, watching as the guards eyed his wagons with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Pathetic weaklings," Tarvin sneered to himself. When they were finally let through, they entered the town, greeted by rows of towering brick houses. Humans seemed to have an odd obsession with tall buildings, Tarvin thought. He had heard rumors of buildings as tall as mountains in their world, though he dismissed it as nonsense. As they moved along the main road, a lone human approached them, dressed in robes marked with two intersecting lines. "May the blessing of the divine fall upon us. I am High Cleric Ralden, and I have come to negotiate." "A human who wants to buy slaves," Tarvin mused, intrigued. 300 silvers for the felines, and 450 for the Volps. He set a high price, fully expecting the human to haggle. But Ralden surprised him by paying the full price without hesitation. "I want 5 from that wagon," the cleric said, pointing to a cart filled with weak and dying slaves. Tarvin scratched his head in confusion. Before he could inquire further, another human approached, this one in a long brown robe. "Peace be upon ye. I am Khalid Yelvok, and I would like to buy 7." Khalid's voice boomed, his tone almost competitive. High Cleric Ralden cast Khalid a begrudging glance before turning back to Tarvin. "I wish to revise my purchase. I'll take 10, Ralden announced calmly. 12, a bald man in an orange robe shouted from behind them. Tarvin turned, bewildered by the sudden bidding war. Another human, this time a woman, approached timidly. "I don't have much, but I would like to free one of those poor souls. These humans are mad," Tarvin thought to himself, watching the bizarre scene unfold. "Perhaps this is why no one's been buying my slaves recently." He paused as the words sunk in. "Wait, did they say free?" His eyes darted to the slaves that had just been bought. The humans were already tending to them, offering food and water, and unlocking their shackles. Tarvin smirked. "Idiots, the first type of human settlement is the blue type." Zalrock Drathel's voice echoed in the ears of the listeners back at the briefing. "A blue type settlement is the most lenient toward slavers, at least by human standards. They allow slavers to pass through, though they'll always try to purchase slaves in order to free them. If you have no use for your slaves and wish to make a profit, blue type settlements are your best option. Just remember, they will always free them, no matter what. Of course, if you'd prefer to avoid the hassle, killing unwanted slaves is an easier route. But why waste the chance to make money?" Zalrock's voice dripped with indifference. "This town is the best." Count Tarvin Garak laughed to himself as he took another swig of ale, savoring the sweet taste of victory. One of his fellow slavers, a lizard sitting beside him, turned and asked, "Have you finished?" "Finished what?" Tarvin asked. "Selling your slaves," the lizard replied. "Oh, that. Not all of them," Tarvin chuckled. "I still need to keep 100 for King Halvor of the Lurup Kingdom. I've sold every last one of mine," the lizard replied. "I'm planning to retire? Why now, when there's so much profit to be made?" Tarvin scoffed, taking another drink. The lizard sighed. "If you plan to keep going, treat your slaves better. It'll make all the difference." Tarvin laughed. "Why bother? The more damaged they are, the quicker the humans buy them up. It's a foolproof plan." The lizard shook his head. "The humans will notice," he said gravely. "And when they do, what are they going to do?" Tarvin sneered, but the lizard had already left. Tarvin turned his gaze to the strange human in the corner, muttering to a box. "A town full of lunatics," he muttered before returning to his drink. That night, Tarvin slept soundly, his mind at ease, dreaming of the riches he'd gained. The next morning, Tarvin's caravan left the town, far wealthier than when they had arrived. Yet, as they passed through more villages, almost no one bought their slaves. Zalrock's briefing resumed in the minds of those who had attended. Yellow-type settlements will force you to employ your slaves as workers. If you only have 1 or 2 personal slaves, this may be tolerable. But for large-scale slavers, it's best to avoid them altogether. The same goes for orange-type settlements, where they will kill any slaver who enters their territory. Tarvin's caravan approached yet another large wall. But this time the mood was different. A human border guard ran toward them, shouting, "Stop. Any slaver who trespasses will be killed on sight." Tarvin's face twisted in anger. "How do you expect us to pass? We're on our way to Lurup." The guard spat on the ground. "Go left, pass through a human village, then turn right to reach the main road." Tarvin cursed under his breath. "Arrogant bastards. Perhaps when I reach King Halvor, we'll deal with these insolent humans for good." His thoughts darkened as they continued their journey, the tension in the air thickening with each step. "Now, the last type of human settlement is the red type," Zalrock's voice warned. "If you encounter a red type settlement, you're as good as dead. They don't just refuse slavers entry, they actively hunt them down. Whether it's a village or a city, if you set foot near their land, you will be killed. Most of these settlements are led by humans with a military background. From tribes such as the America tribe Sina tribe and the Yuan tribe Zalrock paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. These tribes came to our world from across the portal, and while their methods may vary, they all agree on one thing: slavery is an abomination, and all slavers must be eliminated. Count Tarvin Garak lay on the cold ground, his body broken and bloodied. His mind reeled as he tried to comprehend what had happened. His caravan had been ambushed, not by humans alone, but by an army of different races: felines, vulpes, even lizards among them. Traitors. He spat as his vision blurred. A human approached, a strange magic wand in his hand, though it resembled no magic Tarvin had ever seen. "You freed my slaves," Tarvin hissed, his voice weak. "These slaves were meant for King Halvor. You'll pay for this. The Lurp Kingdom will not stand idly by." The human's eyes flickered with amusement, and then they laughed. "What are you laughing at, you insolent Kurbang?" "My lord, I bring terrible news," the messenger stammered, kneeling before the throne of King Halvor called. The king raised an eyebrow, his expression calm yet stern. "Speak." "The slaves your majesty ordered were lost in transport." King Halvor sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "Very well. Inform Lord Grathian Velke to procure another batch. I have no time for these distractions." As the messenger scurried away, the king's daughter, Princess Celine, skipped into the room. "Good evening, father, good evening, my dear," the king replied, a rare smile touching his lips. "How was your lesson with Lady Nereva today?" "We learned more about math," Celine beamed. The king listened patiently to his daughter's excited chatter, though his mind wandered. "Father, where is mother?" Celine asked, her tone suddenly somber. King Halvor's expression softened. "She's still away in Ura, my dear. You know how busy she's been." "Mommy's always busy," Celine pouted. The king nodded in silent agreement. His wife, Queen Sahira, was a human from the Morocco tribes. Ever since the portal had closed, she had been tirelessly gathering artifacts, books, and music from her homeland. While King Halvor admired her dedication, he worried about her relentless pace. Even as queen and diplomat, Sahira worked herself to the bone, often spending long hours away from the family. He glanced down at the courtyard below, where a group of slaves stood huddled together. "Hopefully this surprise gift will lift her spirits," King Halvor mused, stroking his daughter's hair. The king had gone to great lengths to purchase these slaves, despite his distaste for the practice. He knew how deeply his wife despised slavery, so he had gathered 1,000 slaves from the Fida continent, intending to free them in her honor. The price had been steep, but after the humans had pressured the world into abolishing the trade, there weren't many slaves left. King Halvor looked down again, watching as the shackles on the slaves' wrists were unlocked. "Mom will be so happy," Celine whispered, her eyes bright. King Halvor smiled. "Yes, my dear, she will." Zalrock Drathel stood before the crowd, his reptilian eyes gleaming in the dim light of the chamber. "Now, before you leave, there is one final matter that I must address." The room fell silent as the slaver leader's voice took on a darker, more serious tone. "There is a growing movement among the humans and their allies. It's not just isolated villages and settlements causing trouble anymore." Zalrock allowed the tension to build before continuing. "The red-type settlements are forming alliances, not just with their own kind, but with others, those we once thought beneath us. Some lizards, felines, and even vulpes have joined their cause." His voice dripped with contempt at the thought of his fellow lizards aligning with the enemy. "They call themselves the Liberators." Zalrock spat the word like venom. "These groups have begun raiding slave caravans across the continent. They're organized, ruthless, and relentless in their mission to eradicate our way of life." A murmur ran through the crowd as the gravity of his words set in. The idea that slavers could be hunted was unheard of. The notion that races once considered inferior were rising against them was even more unsettling. "We've already lost 3 caravans this month alone. And it's not just humans wielding the weapons. Felines, vulpes, even our own kind have joined their ranks." Zalrock paused for effect. "You might think you're safe. You might think your power, your connections, or your wealth will protect you. But these liberators don't care. They see no difference between a noble like Count Tarvin Garak and the lowliest slaver. To them, we are all the same, and to them, we all deserve to be slaughtered. The silence that followed his words was deafening. For the first time, fear crept into the faces of the crowd. The invincible status they once believed they held was crumbling. So, my advice to you, Zalrock concluded, is to be cautious. Don't let pride blind you to the danger. The red types are not to be trifled with. If you see them, run. If you hear of them, avoid their territory. The guild will not protect fools. With that final warning, Zalrock turned and left the podium, leaving the room steeped in an uneasy silence. Count Tarvin Garak had been arrogant. He had thought himself untouchable. Now, as he lay on the forest floor, bleeding and broken, his mind struggled to comprehend how quickly his world had turned upside down. The liberators had come out of nowhere, attacking with precision and fury. His guards had been cut down within minutes. The slaves he had once thought of as mere property were now standing over him, free, with weapons in their hands. The leader of the group, a human with rough, scarred features, stood above Tarvin, his strange weapon the magic wand that spat fire and metal still smoking in his grip. "Your time is over, slaver," the human said coldly. Tarvin tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth, choking his words. His thoughts raced back to the warning Zalrock had given at the guild briefing. He had been too proud, too confident in his station. He had dismissed the idea that anyone, especially humans, could pose a real threat to him. Now he was paying the price. The human leader knelt beside him, his face inches from Tarvin's. "Tell me, slaver, do you think your king will mourn you? Or will he just send another like you to replace your sorry carcass?" Tarvin's vision blurred, his body weakening as life drained from him. But before the darkness claimed him, he caught one last glimpse of his captors. Among the group of liberators, he saw lizards his own kind, traitors. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. King Halvor Iskald sat in his throne room, the weight of the crown heavy on his brow. The news of Count Tarvin's demise had reached him days ago, though he had yet to publicly react. In truth, the king found himself conflicted. Tarvin had been a loyal servant, but the man had been a fool, too careless and arrogant. His loss, while unfortunate, was not entirely unexpected. What concerned Halvor more was the growing influence of the liberators. Reports were pouring in from across the continent: slaver caravans ambushed, entire towns raided, and slaves freed by the hundreds. The humans were no longer simply opposing slavery, they were waging war against it. As he brooded, the grand doors to the throne room creaked open and Queen Saphira entered, her presence immediately calming the king's turbulent thoughts. Her dark eyes, filled with both wisdom and weariness, met his as she approached. She had just returned from one of her many journeys, seeking remnants of her lost homeland's culture. Her beauty was still striking, but Halvor could see the strain that her tireless efforts were taking on her. "My King," Saphira greeted him with a soft smile, though her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "Welcome back, my queen," Halvor said, rising from his throne to embrace her. "You must be tired, I am," she admitted, resting her head against his chest. "But there is so much work to be done. I found more artifacts from my people, more stories and songs. But it's never enough." "There's always more." Halvor stroked her hair gently, his mind still on the troubles brewing in his kingdom. "I have a gift for you, my love," he said softly. Saphira looked up at him, curiosity in her eyes. "A gift?" Halvor nodded, leading her to the window overlooking the courtyard. Below, the newly freed slaves stood in awe, their chains now shattered. "They are yours, to free as you wish." Saphira's breath caught in her throat as she looked down at the hundreds of slaves gathered. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, a genuine smile graced her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The king watched as his queen descended the stairs to greet the freed slaves, his heart swelling with pride. Perhaps amidst all the chaos, this small act of kindness could bring some peace to their troubled world. But as Halvor stood at the window, watching Saphira embrace the former slaves, a nagging thought tugged at the back of his mind. The liberators were growing stronger with each passing day, and even though his gesture had brought joy to his queen, he knew that the fight against slavery was far from over. Zalrock Drathel's words echoed in the minds of the guild members long after they left the hall. The world was changing, and not in their favor. The humans were not just a nuisance, they were becoming a force to be reckoned with. And worse, they had allies. Old rivalries were crumbling as new alliances formed, all in the name of freedom. For slavers like Count Tarvin Garak, there was no future. The power they had once wielded was slipping through their claws. The question now was not whether they could continue their trade, but how long they could survive in a world that was slowly but surely turning against them. In the shadows of the guild, whispers spread of a new order rising. The liberators were just the beginning. Other factions, once hidden in the cracks of society, were beginning to stir. And as the old world of slavery teetered on the edge of collapse, new leaders were emerging from the most unexpected places. Zalrock Drathel, for all his bluster and arrogance, knew the truth. He could feel it in the air. The winds of change were coming, and when they arrived, they would sweep away everything in their path, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.